The restaurant was buzzing that evening, filled with clinking glasses, soft music, and the low murmur of conversations. Among the diners sat a man whose presence seemed to dominate the room without him even trying. His suit was cut from the finest fabric, his watch gleamed under the golden lights, and the way people whispered about him left no doubt. He was a billionaire. Yet beneath all the polish, there was something cold in his eyes, something that made the waitstaff tread carefully around him. That night, however, he chose the wrong person to underestimate. And what happened next left the entire restaurant stunned into silence. Watching a waitress they barely noticed rise with grace and dignity, in a way that no wealth could ever match. She had been working double shifts for weeks, her body aching, but her spirit refusing to break. Her name was Amira, a young black woman who carried herself with quiet strength, though many overlooked her because of her uniform and tired eyes. She had dreams tucked deep inside, dreams bigger than the walls of the restaurant, but life had handed her struggles she never asked for. That night, as she walked toward his table with her tray, she already sensed he would be difficult. His expression was sharp, his tone dismissive, and his arrogance hung in the air like perfume. When she greeted him politely, his response was a smirk followed by words meant to sting. He turned to the companion at his side and, in Arabic, mocked her under his breath. His words were cruel, filled with stereotypes, dismissing her as just another server, not worth respect. The sting hit her heart, but what he didn't know was that she understood every syllable. Amira's grandmother had spoken to her in Arabic since childhood, her family carrying the language across generations like a hidden treasure. So while the billionaire thought he was clever, whispering insults she would never understand, he had no idea he had walked straight into a lesson that would humble him before everyone watching. Amira felt the heat rise in her chest, not just from the insult, but from the countless times she had been underestimated, dismissed, or treated as invisible. She could have walked away. She could have swallowed her pride and stayed silent, but something inside her refused. With calmness that surprised even her, she placed the tray on his table, looked him directly in the eye, and responded in flawless Arabic. The billionaire froze. His smug expression melted into shock as her words echoed clearly, steady but filled with quiet power. She repeated exactly what he had said, only this time adding her own truth, explaining that respect is not measured by wealth or titles, but by the way one treats others, especially those who serve. The room fell silent. Glasses hovered midair. Forks paused halfway to lips. Every ear turned to catch her words, though only some understood the language. But the tone in her voice was universal. She would not be diminished. The billionaire shifted uncomfortably, his confidence faltering under the weight of her strength. For perhaps the first time in years, he was speechless. The night didn't end there. The manager, hearing murmurs, came rushing over, worried that Amira had overstepped. But the diners themselves defended her, praising the courage they had just witnessed. A woman at the next table, who understood Arabic, explained loudly what had happened. The room erupted with gasps, then nods of respect toward Amira. The billionaire, cornered by the truth, managed only a stiff nod before lowering his gaze, a gesture of defeat. In the days that followed, word spread beyond the walls of that restaurant. Customers returned, asking for the waitress who had spoken truth to power. Some came not for the food but to see her smile, to hear her voice, to remind themselves of the moment they had witnessed. And Amira. She carried herself taller, no longer hiding the brilliance that life had tried to keep small. But the story didn't end with humiliation for the billionaire. Something inside him shifted that night, though it was not visible to anyone else. For the first time, he felt the sting of being wrong in a way money couldn't erase. He remembered her words long after he left, replaying them in the silence of his expensive car, in the emptiness of his mansion. Slowly, painfully, he realized that all his wealth had not bought him the most valuable thing respect earned, not demanded. Weeks later he returned. This time his entrance was quieter, his demeanor softened. He waited until Amira approached, her eyes wary. And instead of arrogance, he offered something he had rarely given anyone: an apology. He spoke not in Arabic, but in English, careful and sincere. He admitted he had been wrong, that he had judged her unfairly, and that her courage had taught him a lesson no boardroom or luxury trip could. Amira listened, her heart conflicted. Forgiveness didn't come easily, not after years of scars from people who thought they were above her. But she saw something different in his eyes that day, a vulnerability that hadn't been there before. She nodded, not to excuse his behavior, but to acknowledge that change, however small, had begun. By the end of the night, the billionaire left again, quieter than ever. But the room no longer remembered him for his wealth. They remembered the waitress who had stood tall, who had turned insult into dignity, who had reminded everyone watching that power lies not in money, but in the courage to speak when silence would have been easier. And long after that evening, Amira's story continued to inspire, proof that respect is universal, and no language can hide the truth when spoken with courage.